Liz, thank you for doing this. I start every podcast with one question. Where were you born?
I was born in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, tell me a little bit about Columbus, Ohio. I'm not very
I
familiar
know
with the area.
absolutely I know absolutely nothing. I moved when I was 1 and
Okay,
I'm technically a Jersey girl, but I it's me and my older sister were born in Columbus cuz my parents were finishing up vet school at Ohio State, and then the rest of my siblings were born in Jersey and get to be real full Jersey assholes, but I have a year missing.
so how many siblings?
I have 4 siblings.
And where do you fall? Are you the eldest of the group?
Second oldest.
Second oldest. Okay,
Yeah.
very cool. And was there an artistic kind of background and stuff when you were growing up? Was the family involved with like being creative?
You know what's interesting is like so both my parents are veterinarians, and they bought a animal hospital. I just asked my dad this recently.
And this is all in
1988.
Jersey, right?
Yeah, this is in Jersey, so in
Okay.
Princeton, and so um, uh, 2 kids still in vet school. Graduate. My mom. I actually was like kind of separated from my mom for that first year, or from 1 to 2, because my mom was finishing up vet school, and she used to fly, and I think she saw me like 3 times from that time. But basically, um, while my parents are doctors and academic people, my mom is pretty crafty. Like she used to do projects with us and stuff, and I remember playing with clay and painting and just in general, especially now seeing her as a grandmother and playing with like my older sister's kids. She's a very creative, crafty person. And then my dad, on the other hand, is what I would like to think was where my success has come from. My dad's really good at creative business. My dad thinks outside the box and comes up with creative solutions and is a problem solver. And so, weirdly enough, traditionally, like forward facing, my parents don't look creative, but they actually really are. And then 3 out of 5 of us are in a creative field.
So curious, do you think that like your dad being entrepreneurial, because I think that's kind of the definition of the world of word of looking at a business and finding a creative and new way or a new solution to something. Do you think that kind of translated into your and your siblings' creative DNA, maybe?
It definitely is an influence, and it's definitely why I think I'm more successful in the type of comedy I do because of, you know what I mean? Like, while my friends have been more successful traditionally because of TV, while I've had to find different solutions to kind of survive business wise. And I don't think I would have been able to do that without my dad's influence of if you want to figure it out, you can figure it out, and just trying stuff.
Okay. So I think that may kind of toughened you up to understand like you can try and fail, but if you keep going, there's success at the end of the road.
100%. All my dad's stories is about trying and failing. I mean, they're legendary stories of trying to get into vet school and it not working out, and trying to get a
Tell me
loan to
one.
buy his first. I mean, it took him 5 tries to get into vet school. My dad would love to be here to tell you that story. So my dad's dyslexic, but he probably didn't know he was dyslexic until his fourth kid was diagnosed as dyslexic. So my older sister's dyslexic, I'm dyslexic, Emily's dyslexic, and then Sam, who's number 4, is probably the most dyslexic. And he started to be like, I think I have these problems. Like, it's almost kind of funny that it took him that long to be like, but I can't even imagine what it was like to be dyslexic in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and all the things without even knowing he had this problem, he would have his aunt help him with, or other people help him with. So I think in general, his learning disabilities made it more difficult to get into vet school. But I think also the reason he is this successful, both veterinarian and someone that ended up at one point having 3 animal hospitals, was because it took him 5 tries to get into vet school.
Perseverance, I guess, not never giving up is kind of your dad's story in a bunch of
Oh
different
yeah, he
interesting
loves
ways, I bet.
his favorite movie is Rudy. He loves all that shit.
Can your dad adopt me? It's one of my favorite all-time movies. I cry every time I watch Rudy
Yeah.
because it really sums up in not just as a sports movie, but a movie about life of just like never giving up. And
And also,
you know,
yeah.
no, I was just gonna say like for a lot of us that didn't have much and are trying to make something. And I feel like almost all comedians come from that kind of a background of like not having much and trying to attain something better. Movies like that just kind of give you hope.
Absolutely. And I also think like it's one thing to believe in yourself, it's another thing to have people around you believe in you. So like I honestly look at it from like the best friend's perspective, like his buddy that was just kind of there for him. And like that's where I get choked up, where it's just like the amount of times that I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I fucked up. I don't know why I'm here. And I've had a friend being like, you're fine. Just keep going. And I was like, should I? And they're like, yes. Like, so I also think it's equally the perseverance you have for yourself, but I 100 believe that most people's success is community.
Yeah, at some point, confirmation has to come in. Someone else has to validate what you've been doing, even if it's a friend, even if it's a random stranger like comedians. At least I've had the honor of interviewing 7 people at this point, and what I've understood is that like that one chuckle that you get the first time you go on stage kind of lights the fire of hope forever.
Yeah.
Was that what kind of sparked it for you? What made you want to get up the first time?
I had discovered stand up when I was a teenager. I think I was like 13 or 14. And because I'm dyslexic, I was writing, like I was in all these like after school programs for like help and stuff like that. And they help you with your homework, and they make you write to get better at writing and reading and all that shit. And I started to kind of develop this passion for writing. I would write these little books when I was in elementary school. And as I got older, I started writing these short stories. And I felt in school where I shined was kind of creative writing. And I thought maybe I wanted to be an actor because I'm like one of 5 kids, and Sandra Bullock was in her pratfall phase. And I was like, I don't know, maybe that's a way to get attention, because I wasn't getting attention at home. But I clearly wanted to do something creative. And then when I discovered stand up, it just like it all kind of clicked, because it's like, oh, I could showcase my writing, but nobody physically saw my written word. Because I would never, like, in my mind, I thought I could never write a book. Like, I don't know how to spell. My grammar's awful. Like, it just became this like perfect combination of being able to be the center of attention, which I was like, oh my God, I get to talk and nobody else does. This is the best thing that's ever been invented. And then I got to showcase my ideas and writing again without anybody seeing it. So I just became obsessed. Like this is V8, this is 14, so this is 99. So I'm
Okay.
like taping premium blends and half-hour specials off TV via VHSs, and I'm literally anybody I discover, I'm buying their album and stuff like that. And I would go over to girlfriends' houses for sleepovers, and they're like doing drugs, and like I would go to parties where everybody's trying to like make out and like have sex, and I'm like, guys, Mitch Hedberg. If anybody wants to watch Mitch Hedberg, like, what I mean, like genuinely, like not on the same wavelength as any of my friends. But I discovered all these comedians, and I just became obsessed with this ability to share your perspective in a time where I felt like my voice and my ideas weren't valid or heard. And I found it to be the language that got me the most attention. So I would quote comedians, and I would make my mom laugh, and I would have something to share with my dad where he wasn't mad at me. And it just felt like the little bit of reprieve, both emotionally, just watching stand up, it made me happy. But even when I brought stand up to my family or my friends, it was like this positive attention. So I started writing jokes when I was 14 and showing it to my friends in the hallway, and basically making these packets. And I would have all my friends star and underline what they thought was funny. And that's how I collectively made my first 5 minutes. And I wanted to do it at 15, but I was like too scared and I didn't know what to do. And it wasn't until I was 16 that I started.
So, 2 questions to follow up. First comedian that kind of you discovered and were inspired by, and where did you actually go up on stage the first time at 16?
I can't remember like the first comedian. I can only remember like the batch of comedians that like I loved. So like I loved Mitch Hedberg, I loved Greg Giraldo, I loved Bill Burr, I loved Jim Gaffigan. This is all, like I said, 1999, 2000,
When Comedy
half
Central
hours.
was still good.
Yeah, Nick Swartzen, Dane Cook, Wanda Sykes. She was Wanda Sykes Hall. She was married to a man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's how far ago. Kathleen Madigan. Um, God, like, there was just this kind of, now so many are famous and my peers and,
I mean,
just
every
so
name
many.
you gave is a big person now. I mean, huge
Yeah, of
stars in
course.
and of.
Yeah, like, Dave Chappelle, I was a huge fan of. Um, uh, Todd Barry, who's now a friend of mine. Like, there's so many people that I discovered just through these little premium blends half hours that I don't know, I loved their perspective. I just thought they were able to talk about anything and make it interesting. Um, so um, the first place I performed, I did a bringer show, meaning I brought people to come watch me. I did a bringer show at the Cellar when I was 16. So I brought
Okay.
5 friends. Dino Bidala hosted. He's now a friend of mine, which I find wild. I have this VHS tape that somebody made into an MP4 for me. And this, I'm like, I think it's so funny when I celebrated 20 years last year. And I was telling Dino Bidala, who I do his radio show on Sirius, I was like, you hosted my first show. He's like, did I? And I just show him, he's like, that's wild. Like, um, so yeah, so I knew enough. This is, before podcasts and before there was so much accessibility to, there's no one way path to being a stand up whatsoever, but there was really no how to do. There's a couple like how to do books, which I read, but there really wasn't anything. Like, I read a couple of joke books, like Sinbad had a joke book and Chris Rock and Seinfeld had a book, which is just them writing out their jokes. Like, I don't essentially understand what the purpose of that was, but I think from a how to visually seeing jokes, I think that did have a positive influence as from somebody that was trying to write them. Carlin had his books, but it was Margaret Cho had a memoir, and she had started at 15. Dave Chappelle started at 14, and I had read some articles. I was a huge Mel Brooks, Sid Caesar fan, and there was like a Mel Brooks book that I read. I read Richard Pryor's book, and then I think it was Dennis Miller had this like novel about 4 comedians on the road, and I read that book. So I was like taking like anything that talked about stand up to try to understand how to do it, how to start, how long it took and all that stuff. And I think I knew when I started it was going to take, they all made it sound like it's a marathon, not a race, and it's going to take 10 years for you to find your voice. And it was like, it was very much this like lower your expectations. It doesn't work out for most people and it takes a while. And I weirdly enough I was at the right age and I had the right level of passion that I kind of had my expectations super low when I did stand up for the first time. So the fact that I got any laughs, I knew not to think I was going to go out there and kill. And I knew enough to know that any laugh was good. So I did this 5-minute set and I got a couple of laughs and I was just proud of myself for doing it and celebrated that. And then B was just proud that I got any laughs and I was like addicted immediately.
I had no idea that there were so many books that were out by different comedians. The only one that I have known about is the one by Steve Martin, Born Standing Up. I actually have a copy always in my bookshelf.
Yeah, but that came out, fairly
Later, right?
recently. Yeah, like 8 years ago or something. Like that came out 8 to 10 years ago. I'm talking about like literally
15,
like
20 years ago.
Yeah, Bill Cosby had a book on parenthood, you know what I mean? And he had a joke book. And it was mostly
Interesting.
people where they would take their stand up and they just put it in a book, which again, I don't know who that's for other than comedians visually seeing how to write a joke. I just don't understand who was buying those otherwise. But like I said, Chris Rock had one, Sinbad had one, Seinfeld had one, Cosby had one. So that was like the big thing they did. And then Carlin did something a little differently, which he would take these little ideas, like, brain droppings was one of them. But he'd always almost do like these baby essays, anywhere from like a page to like a paragraph. And he started doing those in the 90s until, I think until he died, because I have a couple of his books. But yeah, it was mostly biographies, memoirs, and joke books. That was really it. And then a couple of how-to books. I think it's out of print, but you can still find it. But I found the best book, at least at the time, I haven't read it since, I think it was Zen and the Art of Stand-Up Comedy. And I just found it to be like bare bones and honest and let you find yourself, as opposed to some of these other like how-to books. It was like, it's the rule of threes and this is how you do it. And it's just like, you're just copy and pasting what people believe funny is, as opposed to truly finding what you find to be interesting and funny.
Yeah, I lived in California for a long time, so I ended up, just out of curiosity, taking a stand-up comedy class at a place called Flappers Comedy Club in Burbank.
Yeah, no
Um,
flappers.
and it was strange. I wasn't expecting to become a comedian or anything. I was just curious as to the process, but they made it so stringent in the class, and you had to follow rules where I felt like it was supposed to be more of a creative outlet of, let me put stuff on paper and possibly tell me where I can find the funny. But they were just like you were saying, the rule of three, and you have to do it like this, and this is the way the delivery has to work. And I don't see stand-up comedians really following a rule when they're good. When they're amazing comedians, it's just a story that flows so naturally.
Yeah, and I do think knowing some basic principles in all writing, whether it's you're writing a novel or writing jokes or writing a memoir, whatever it is, I think all basic principles should be known. I think there's a place to be like, hey, these are some tactics people use. And if you're feeling like your message isn't getting across, sorry, I have
Cat.
two cats trying to get into what is a canister of dry food. So they knock it over and then they play with it. We'll see how
That's
this goes.
awesome.
Um, so yes, I think understanding those things, absolutely. But it should be like, hey, just so you know, these are some things. And then you let people just dump on themselves. And you could be like, hey, while this story is interesting, you're giving too many details, or, it's been 4 minutes since you've done anything that's making someone give a laugh. Like, I think there's more taking the way I see it is like, what is a bad parent? A bad parent believes that their children are an extension of them and they are trying to mold them so that they are like them, right? Which is
Yes.
like, what are we doing here? Like, you know what I mean? Like, get a dog. If that's what we're doing, get a dog.
And even
I
you, as like cats and dogs, they have their own personalities. You can control it
Oh,
to limited amounts.
absolutely. Absolutely. So the same thing with a good parent would be somebody that sees who their kid is becoming and puts guardrails and boundaries to both keep them safe and to have them be a person that they are proud of. So you want your kid to be kind, you want your kid to apply themselves, you want them to be hardworking, you want them to be thoughtful, but you can't decide if they are going to be, there's going to be a lot of people that fight me on this, but you can't decide if they're going to be a doctor, and you can't decide if they're going to be somebody that wakes up early, and you can't decide, you know what I mean? You have to let them show who they are and express themselves and relay principles of being a good person and somebody with strong morals, but you can't implement exactly you can't just take who you are and smack it on that. You're not downloading, you know what I mean? And I think the same thing with stand-up is, if a good teacher sees who you are and what you're expressing and gives you tools and skills to be a better version of that, but not change who you are. And I think you see a lot of teachers be like, this is how you write jokes, that's not what you want. You go, this is how you express yourself accurately and can develop on your own. And a good teacher can see how to kind of keep it focused and kind of let you shine, as opposed to what it sounded like at that club, which is like cut and paste.
Yeah. And a lot of like what you mentioned about word economy and making sure that within that 5 minute set that, at least every 15 to 40 seconds, you've got something being either set up or a delivery to keep the audience engaged. That structure, that fundamental stuff, I completely agree with you. But the same with parenting. I think as a parent, the one thing that doesn't make me what you described as the bad parents is I know how shitty I was as a human being and how many mistakes I made. Why would I ever want to put that on my kids?
Yeah.
And having more than one, I don't know why parents forget this at some point. Your kids are born completely different individuals. Like you said, one kid wakes up super early, one kid wakes up late, one is very creative. And if you can see that and recognize it, that's being a good parent and a good teacher, just like you said. But I think at some point our egos may get in the way and we feel like the public should perceive us in a different way, and our children or the comedians that we teach are kind of like this conduit for the public.
Yeah.
Which I know it could be scary, but you're right. Every child should become their own individual because at some point we all did.
100%. And I think the boundary between um, setting principles and guidelines for somebody, both as a child or a comedian, can get blurred between uh, um, telling them exactly what to do. So I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not a parent. So, I help raise my little brothers. I have nieces and nephews, but I also understand, you know, I'm from a high horse of not having to apply anything I just said. Nor am I a teacher. But that being said, I don't think any parent would disagree that
Some would.
yeah, I mean, even my dad
I
would. And my dad did a good job. I mean, my dad did a good job almost in spite of himself. Because me and my siblings are incredible people and all very individual people. But that being said, when he's mad at us or frustrated with us, and even to this day, I have to sit my dad down and be like, "What are you mad about?" Because whoever you're angry at, what sibling you're angry at, is doing great, doing better than most people. He's just not exactly where you want him to be at this moment. And you know what? The world's different, life's different, and his priorities are different. And you're punishing him because he doesn't have the same priorities you do. That's garbage. That's just not fair. And I think teachers can do that in the sense that you feel like your job is to give everybody the tools to do the best that they can. And when you see somebody not picking up those tools, some people just aren't getting it. But some people go, well, I think I can do it differently. And your instinct is to be like, no, 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 you got to do it this way. But the truth of the matter is a good teacher can see you doing differently and help you shape your different world better.
Yeah. And I think to that effect, recently, what we've kind of been seeing with all the stuff that's going on in public schools and in other areas of the world, I kind of had this argument with somebody and they're like, but there are good teachers and this and that. I was like, no, there aren't. I'm like, you can't pay somebody 30 to 40 grand a year to do that job and expect them to be good.
Yeah.
Pay them 150 plus, then you would have the top of the litter of the best fighting for that job to teach your kids. But we don't
Yeah.
do that, do we?
No, we don't. No, not at
So,
all.
and the frustration, I mean, comes to me in the sense that like there really is no playbook of what it means to be a good teacher. You go to a 4 year university that teaches you stupid fundamentals of like basic stuff, and then they throw you into a school and say, cool, teach these kids and be emotionally there for them and all that stuff. And are you prepared? You probably aren't.
Yeah.
And this is kind
Yeah.
of like why we have so many failures. But you kind of touched upon something about your dad and being mad. Is that something that was like a prevailing theme growing up? What was the teaching style of your parents kind of to mold you guys and shape you guys? Because I mean, a family of five, at some point, somebody's going to like do stuff and they're not going to notice it.
Oh yeah, I did a ton of drugs, and my mom is only finding out via stand up. I was a very responsible, irresponsible person. I it's funny because like I think my parents did an incredible job where and then everything they fucked up therapy is fixing. So and like, you know, my dad used to get kind of butthurt that we were all in therapy and I was like, why? Like we know to go. It's not all you, some of it's society. And you did a damn good job. Everybody's smart, thoughtful, kind. We all have friends. We're all like crafty. We're all interesting. We're all funny. We're all annoying, but in like a fun way. Like I I think my dad was extremely strict, very, very strict. I mean, it started to get slightly less strict as he had, you know, more kids. And like to this day, like my brothers were able to play video games and I wasn't. Like me and my sisters weren't. And my brother would want to play video games and I go, it's just not fun for me. Like I didn't build up that skill set and it's just nobody likes to lose all the time in their free time. Like it's just not a fun activity because I have literally no basis of skills. Um, but I think because he held us to a high standard, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, sometimes it's too high of a standard and there was a lot of like self-deprecation and self-bullying that I've had to fix. But I also am known as one of the hardest working people in this business because of the work ethic that my dad instilled in all of us. Like you sign your name to everything and you your work represents you. And you know, there's so many things that my dad went too far with, and I think that's his journey. I mean, I think he still struggles with that, but at the same time, I think it's the reason that all of my siblings, like if my siblings or I work for you, like we're your best employee. And if you're friends with us, we're probably your most reliable friend. And if you need to borrow money, all of us have a savings account. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's these like kind of Miele principles that across the board kind of all stand for us. We also all have the worst sweet tooths. Like, I mean, it's pretty bad. I was telling my dad because my last name means honey in Italian, and I was like, they talk about how like ancestrally, you know, if you're Japanese, eating a lot of seaweed, that's probably ancestrally what your family did, and that seaweed is going to have more of a health impact on your health benefits. But like for somebody that's Mediterranean to eat seaweed, it might not have the same impact because that's not what our ancestors grew up eating. And
Yeah.
I was like, do you think we all have a sweet tooth? Like, do you think somebody was a bear or like a bee or something? Like, why do we all even my sister's kids have sweet tooths, my parents have sweet tooths, my parents like we all I've met people that don't like sweets and I'm just like, that's wild to me because there's not one person. I could ask anybody in my family, you want ice cream now? And they're like, of course I do. So I do think
That's
there's some stuff.
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think some stuff is hereditary and then I think some stuff is relayed and I think some stuff is trauma. Like I think it's all
So who's the sweet tooth in the family? Was it dad or was it mom?
both.
Really? Okay. So that's why everybody, because comparison to me, I don't have a sweet tooth. My wife does. So my kids are kind of like split down the middle, half do, half
Yeah.
don't, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of, it's so funny when we become adults, we find these small things that we mimic about our parents without even knowing, like sweet tooth or things like that. And you can sit down and you're like, oh shit, I'm completely like my dad or like my mom in that respect.
Yeah,
Is
I'm very much my father.
so how did failure in the household growing up uh, transpire? Like, if you tried something and failed at it, was it embraced with do keep trying, or was it like, oh, you're a loser and you can't do it? You know, usually families are kind of divided into two teams.
No, it was absolutely you did your best, let's try again. Like it was 100% show up, do your best, learn from it. Like my dad, I did gymnastics for 11 years. I quit when I was 14 And my dad would drop me off and say, give 110%. And then he'd pick me up and ask me if I did my best today. Like, he treated something that was extracurricular, probably too much pressure, but still treated something that was extra, in general, as something that you should still do your best at.
So I mean, I kind of feel like maybe your dad was trying to fix the scars that came from his dad and the dad before that, and all of them went through like two world wars and stuff, and this is
Yeah.
like early 1900s. So I was gonna ask, since you've got nieces and nephews, do you see the progression in normalization, whereas like you and your siblings kind of went through uh, less of what your dad went through, and is it translating into less into your nieces and nephews as far as the bad stuff?
I don't know. They're pretty young, and I I don't know if my older sister has healed a lot of that stuff, if I'm being honest. So I think it might be a little different if somebody like my younger sister had kids, because she's been in therapy almost as long as I have. Hey, sorry, I'm watching a cat about to jump on this computer.
No, no,
Um,
don't worry.
it's just so funny to like genuinely like there's a cat here, and then there's one there. Like I'm just like I feel like I'm like a bunch of sharks by me. Um, so I think in a lot of ways, time will tell. My oldest nephew Cooper is almost 9, and my sister had a rule because with the pandemic, it was like she was just it was too much. I mean, she's working from home and she has 3 kids not in school, and they're too young to like actually be able to apply themselves on Zoom. And my sister was like trying to limit iPad time and TV time, but what are you supposed to do when you have no help? And so her thing was, if you're going to be on your iPad, it has to be educational. And learning a skill, whatever that skill was educational. So Cooper would watch this guy on YouTube that taught you how to draw. And he became incredible. Like incredible. Like cuz my brother-in-law is pretty good at art. Like he'd draw stuff for them, and like make really crafty cakes for them for their birthday and stuff like that. I thought it was my brother-in-law. Like they were so good. He's like, "This is a dragon." I was like, "Yeah, man, I can see it's a dragon. It's like the best dragon I've ever seen." Like he just had this full notebook, and he spent literally a year of the pandemic getting really good at drawing. And I was like, looking at my sister, I was like, "He's 7. This is incredible. Like this is mind-blowing." So I think one, creativity is absolutely appreciated and rewarded in my family, and I think my parents were like that, and my older sister and my brother-in-law are like that. And I think being good to your siblings, which was very much rewarded in my family, and being kind is rewarded. I see a lot of the principles that hey, Christ, sorry, um, just completely tied into my headphones. Um, I I can see these principles that were important to my parents that I see in all my siblings. I can see how my sister and brother-in-law are instilling those as well. I believe that they're letting them be themselves, but who knows? You know what I mean? Like, I think only time will tell, but it does feel like their uniqueness is rewarded. Like Scout is very girly, and just kind of wears dresses and loves getting her nails done. And my sister, she wants to be a princess. I don't, we're not, me and my older sister weren't princess like people, but she's not making her feel bad because that's what she likes. She's going, that's what we're doing. And Cooper likes Pokemon, and he has every Pokemon card that has ever been printed. So you know what I mean? So there's these aspects of them that I don't feel like they're trying to put them in a box. They're also very young. I think it's when you're a teenager and you allow your kids, that's when they start to make real life altering mistakes. There's still pretty heavy guardrails on a 9-year-old.
Well, they should be because I mean, if you remember yourself at 9, you're 2 brain cells shy of just killing yourself at all
Oh, of
times.
course, every day, every day. I don't even know why someone's not watching me right now.
Yeah, I have that feeling sometimes too. I know exactly what that means. But it's interesting to kind of like look at how so much of the toughness of your dad probably translated into you being today recognized as one of the hardest working comedians, whereas a lot of comedians are just lazy. I think that's kind of maybe their downfall.
Yeah, some of it I don't even know if it's lazy as much as this business makes you feel like you have to be chosen and that there is no real path or there's only one path. And if you're not on it, then there's nothing you can do. And I just think my dad taught me there's always something you can do, whether it's just get better at what you're doing so that you are the best, or finding a door, finding, you know what I mean? Like a crack in the wall. Like it was, if success is an escape room, who's trying one or two things and giving up? You know what I mean? I think he kind of was like, everything is a tool. Everything is something that can help you. Everything is an option. So I feel like most people emotionally and or physically give up pretty quickly when it's not a straightforward path. And I think nothing in my family's life has been straightforward. I grew up with almost no grandparents. I had one living grandparent that I didn't see very often, but my my parents' mothers committed suicide when they were younger. So my
Both?
parents, both of them. Yeah.
Whoa.
So my dad raised his siblings, and my mom was the youngest of three. And when her mom killed herself, she had, her dad had died when she was 10. She ended up living in the dorms because she had nowhere else to go. And so I think about my parents who became parents not really having any guidance and no money and no backup plan and no help. And it's like they wanted to be veterinarians, they wanted to have kids, they wanted to have some kind of financial security, and no one was really there to guide them or help them, and they figured it out. And my parents did incredible. They just sold their business during the pandemic, and I'm very fortunate as my friends' parents get older that I didn't even realize it. Like I don't have to worry about my parents' finances, and I'm hearing more and more as my friends are like, my parents are getting older and sicker and they're broke. And that's not something I have to think about because of what my dad has done for himself. You know what I mean? And that was 100% him. So it's like my own financial literacy is because of him, but even my financial stability today is because of the work I did 10 years ago, figuring out how to make royalties and how to make albums on my own and how to make money when I wasn't touring, because I could see in the future, I'm tired now, I'm only going to get more tired. How do I make money while not being on the road? And how do I make money as a comedian even if I'm not famous? And I think there's a lot of people that's brains don't work that way, but also they just weren't taught that financial literacy of, make more than you spend, how to save, how to live below your means, like stuff that sounds pretty basic. But like my old roommate Chris, we lived together for 11 years. He grew up poor in the Bronx, and he asked me one day, like 10 years into our friendship, he goes, take me through how you plan your bills and like how you plan. And I was like, oh, okay. So I know how much our rent is. At the time, our rent was $1,000. And I was like, as soon as I get $1,000, like whatever the gig is, it doesn't matter if it's two $500 gigs or it's one $1,200 gig. Whenever I get a gig that pays my rent, I know my rent's paid and I can calm a little bit. But I'm working every month to just have that rent be paid. Now, do I have it right now in my savings? I absolutely do. But that money doesn't exist. That money's dead. We don't think about that money. That money is truly gone in my mind, and I try not to touch it. So everything I'm working towards is to make sure that at the biggest expense is my rent. If we pay my rent, we can always find food. We can always find, you know what I mean? Whatever. So then I know how much I need to make for the whole month for all my expenses. And next thing you know, I'm chipping away at it. And so then it's like, if I get all my expenses, great. And then if I get more, I know in the future, because of the lifestyle of a freelance person, that there's always some month that is devastating. Like, especially with the pandemic, like I had this huge New Year's Eve gig that was going to pay for everything. And then it got canceled because of a variant. So I was basically breaking down like how my brain works so that I can figure out my expenses. And he's like, oh, I don't do that. I go, what do you do? He goes, I don't know. When I get stuff, I get stuff. And I was like, what? And he's a fashion photographer and videographer. And I was like, what? Like, and he's like, yeah. And then once I have money and I spend it on whatever I want to spend it on. And I'm like, what? like genuinely, like almost like a parent being like, what? We've lived together for 10 years. This is how you do it. He's also was late paying rent every year for 10 years, and he's my friend and I made it work. But like, and he always paid me. But like at the same time, I was like, this is so fascinating. And I know 100% it's because of my dad's financial literacy and how he taught us to be responsible in that sense.
Did your dad grow up poor?
Yeah, very.
I know you touched upon this, and up to you, but what caused the suicides of both grandmothers?
Oh, both grandmothers were mentally ill. So my brother Sam has bipolar one, and he was in and out of mental hospitals about 5 years ago. And so I always knew it was on both sides, but it wasn't until my brother started having psychotic breaks and like seeing people and stuff that my dad started talking about his mother, who was like bedridden and in and out of mental hospitals when he was younger. So it's clear that she probably had, if not bipolar one, which is what my brother has, she had something. So it could have been schizophrenia, it could have been bipolar one, but she definitely had some kind of mental illness similar to what my brother has, because it very much is hereditary. And then my mom's mom, I don't know as much. My mom doesn't really talk about it. Her death was much more gruesome and sadder.
Okay.
But she also struggled with mental illness.
You said bipolar one, so I'm not very familiar. And for those of listening, what is it? The difference? Is there more than one bipolar?
Yeah, so most people when they hear bipolar, they're actually thinking of bipolar 2. So bipolar 2 is just depression and mania. You know what I mean? So the lowest of lows and then the kind of crazy highest of highs. Bipolar 1
Yes.
is depression, mania, psychotic break. And the psychotic breaks can seem like schizophrenia. Like his first diagnosis was schizophrenia, but the difference between a psychotic break of somebody that has bipolar 1 and the psychotic break of somebody with schizophrenia is schizophrenia, their break doesn't make sense. Like ghosts are attacking ninjas that are trying to get at my brain. You know what I mean? Like it's like garbage. As opposed to bipolar 1, it's based in some kind of reality, but it's not real. So seeing people, I'm talking to this guy and he told me I need to go to the gas station and pick up Jesus. Like, you know what I mean? They're like
Okay.
things that are like, my brother thought he was Jesus. My brother stabbed a tree that represented my father. My brother sent books to all the books in the bookcase because they were talking to them. He thought he would unplug the Wi-Fi because he thought it was messing with his brain. Wi-Fi exists, books exist. The people he was talking to seemed like real people that could happen. Jesus is a figure that people know of, as opposed to schizophrenia. Like you put the puzzle pieces together and it doesn't make anything.
Okay.
So,
The manifestation is very different in schizophrenia versus bipolar one, where
yeah,
bipolar one is rooted in reality somewhere, but it's kind
it's
of
rooted
skewed.
in reality. This is my rudimentary like understanding of it from like everything I've read and talked to doctors about. But like you put the pieces together of the psychotic break of bipolar 1 and it tells a story, as opposed to you put the pieces of a psychotic break from schizophrenia and it's just garbled nonsense.
Okay,
And
that
that's
makes
and
sense.
and that's how you kind of, and then also the stages of it. So the fact that my brother had deep depressions where he couldn't get out of bed, and then he had these manias where he was very creative and had a lot of ideas and stuff like that. So he not only did he go through the stages of bipolar, but then when he had his psychotic breaks, they were some kind of crazy reality.
Ooh, that was a heavy one.
Yeah.
So 5 years, he in and out of mental hospitals and things like that. Now, on the other side of that, how is he doing now?
Awesome. He's awesome. So it took a while both to find the right mix of medications and then also for him to know that he has to take them. This started when he was 19. He is 29 now. So he's been good, I think, for about 5 years, and then also just killing it in the last like three. Like he, during the pandemic, he got super into cooking. He lost like 80 pounds. He's like one of the best cooks, by the way. And then he's really crafty. When all this stuff went down, he was at SCAD going to school for art and dropped out, obviously. And he started learning woodworking and blacksmithing. Do I have Sam stuff? There's like a Sam picture there. I have half my room is like Sam art.
I was gonna
Incredible
ask
artist.
because the paintings are so cool behind you. I was
Yeah,
very
these
curious.
are all like weird things I've collected over time, but most of Sam's stuff is actually on the other side. And then he makes lamps. He does mosaics and glass art. Um, uh, he's just become like he has like an Etsy shop and is doing a lot of
Well,
custom stuff. He's just incredible.
what's his Etsy shop? On the off chance the 15 people that listen to this want to
Yeah,
buy a
yeah,
lamp.
it's Shady Lamps Designs. So Shady Lamps plural designs. But I post a lot of them on my Instagram, and um, I now have a joke about a lamp he made as a gift for a friend of mine, and I now have an 11-minute story about it. So he's
Oh,
weirdly
cool.
getting, yeah, he's weirdly, and like I have jokes about his, like I always got his permission to do jokes about his psychotic breaks and stuff like that, and even like the mental illness in our family. I've talked to my parents about it to make sure it's okay to like talk about. But my brother is probably the funniest person in our family. Like I don't even come close. Like he is the smartest one in our family. He's the funniest one in our family, and he's the best human. So there's nobody that met my brother and was like, oh, I'll take this one. He's like, if you have to choose between me and Sam, everybody's like, I'll take Sam. So it's one of those things where I'm fortunate that he's the best at everything.
Any chance he'll get up on the stage?
He thought about it like when he started getting a little bit healthier about 5 years ago. He thought about it, and I told him, I was like, if you do it, I'm more than happy to help. It's a hard life, there's a lot of rejection, but I can guide you and I'm happy to help you. So he started writing. And what's interesting is I told him, I was like, your writing is like, he's really creative. I was like, your writing is like 3 years in. I was like, you're already above and beyond most of the people when it comes to writing. I do think your stage presence is going to be the hard part for you because he's a shy guy and he's gregarious around us, but like he like doesn't really like ordering, and he kind of becomes small in public. And so I was like, if you can get past the hump of how difficult it is to remember these things, because he's also very dyslexic, and then also the performance aspect, I was like, I think you'll do great, but you tell me when you want help. And then eventually he didn't want to do it, and now he like writes short stories and stuff, and does more like hands-on creativity.
Weird question. Have you ever thought about using what he wrote in your stand-up act? Kind of like a duo kind of a thing. You write, I perform, like Chappelle and Neil Brennan did for so many years. Not on his stand-up stuff, but Neil did a lot of the work on the movies and shows that they worked on.
Sure, I've thought about if I wrote like a TV show, I would definitely have his input because he has such a creative mind. Almost he can't really like write because he is like severely dyslexic. Not saying that he can't, but it's like it's a little bit.
It's a challenge, I'm sure.
It really is. And like even when he writes to me, I'm like, Sam, what does this say? So he's not somebody that like his writing isn't forward facing. Like he would need truly like an intern to type things up for him. Like there are some people that like just say things out loud and somebody types it. He's probably that level of dyslexia. Um,
Okay.
but he's seen me perform and he's given me tags. Like he's helped a couple of different tags. Like, and I have friends that have given me tags and vice versa and stuff like that. So I'm not against any of that. I just don't know if that's where his desire lies. Like he used to come on the road with me and he's not as interested in doing that as much anymore, which is fine.
But I mean, at this point, he's got his own creative outlets that are doing great, and he's seems like
100%.
he's in a happy place right now.
He's doing awesome.
Because, and was there a period where maybe he was just misdiagnosed for a long time as just depression, or anxiety disorder versus bipolar 1, which should have been something that came about years ago?
You can't really diagnose that until they have a psychotic break. You know what I mean? So that's what's kind of challenging is that he did have depression in high school, but we all had depression in high school. I mean, we all have some form of I have anxiety. I have probably OCD. I have probably ADHD. I definitely have suffered from depression. But like, I can tell you, my depression hasn't been nearly as bad since I went off birth control. And they really didn't know about how underlying like genetical depression can be exacerbated by hormonal birth control. And I didn't know that. And even till I went off it and I saw how much healthier and happier I was off it. So there's some things that you just don't know because there's too many variables. So even with all the different types of mental illness, they read this way until something happens to make it read a different way so that you can have and I'm sure it's been a while since I've read this stuff, but even with bipolar, there's like depressive bipolar, and then there's where they're more likely to be depressive than manic, and then there's manic. There's different words for this, by the way. I just don't know the clinical terms, but then there's manic bipolar where they're more likely to be manic than they are to be depressive. So somebody that's kind of manic bipolar, you might not even know they're bipolar because they rarely reach the lows. They're just kind of normal and like, you know what I mean? And people are like, they're just creative. They're so creative. As opposed to like, if you're mostly depressive and you don't hit that many manias, people are going to diagnose you as depressed with like maybe clinical depression when the truth is you're actually bipolar. You just don't hit the manias as often. So that's where it gets like super complicated, that until something gets expressed, they don't know that it's bipolar.
I also wonder
It's,
if.
yeah.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, and so what would happen is if you get, like, if someone gives you a medication for depression when really you have bipolar, you might not be seeing the positive results of that medication because it's not treating the right thing. But you
Yeah, I
wouldn't
mean,
know because you think they have depression.
and that's actually what I was going to ask is I wonder if some people have bipolar 2, let's say bipolar mania, but their depression levels are so low that baseline is mania for them. So like when they reach regular for certain times, that is the mania because they're just so far deep into the depression side of it. It
Sure,
was my
absolutely.
curiosity.
Yeah, so
Because
I think that's the biggest thing is until something about it expresses, people are diagnosing whatever is the forward facing what do you call it? Symptom.
the
So
diagnosis, symptom, thank you. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's super complicated and my brother, my whole family are grateful that we found what was going on and the right combination of drugs. And my brother, just like anybody, had points where he's like, I don't need this. And that's where a lot of the relapses were. But, he understands it. If he's on top of it, he's diligent about it. And he's been great.
And he feels like he's just got a normal life when he's taking the pills on time and just trying to be like good about the discipline part of keeping the disease in check.
Yeah. And I think we all, because his mania always happened in the spring and that was always the precursor. Um, so
Interesting. Was there a reason for that? I'm sorry to cut you off, but I've
I
never
don't
heard of
know.
it
So
like being seasonal.
there's cycles. So there's rapid cycle people. So there's people that cycle bipolar in a day, people that bipolar in a couple of weeks, people in a year. So his seemed to be yearly, that the mania would happen in the spring and then it would be a psychotic break. And then usually because of medication, he would hit into a depression, as opposed to there are rapid cyclers. Like there are people that we've met them. We might not be close to them where they're fucking crafty and high in the morning and then they're suicidal at night. Like there's different types of, it's called, that one's called rapid cycling, but there's different cycles. And so weirdly enough, since Sam has been dealing with this for 10 years, his cycle is about a year.
And when he would go through the cycle and the psychotic break would inevitably happen, it seems like this happened for a few years before kind of things were put on the right track. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, it took years. Yeah, it's one, they didn't even know what it was, and two, even when it did seem like it went on the right track, Sam would stop taking his drugs, and that would set it off all over again.
And when the psychotic breaks would happen, it was pretty clear that this was happening. Like you guys kind of knew the playbook
Oh,
at that point of like this is
oh
the
yeah.
steps that's going to happen.
I mean, the police in our community knew it was happening. I mean, he would get picked up by the police. He would, you know what I mean? Like the whole community, he was like the local crazy guy. Yeah, everybody knew when it was happening. I think what's hard is that mental hospitals are not only saturated, they're unhelpful and they're awful. And so he wouldn't want to go. And my parents would make these promises and be like, if you take your meds, you don't have to go. But then he wasn't getting better, or he wasn't actually taking his meds. And, you know, I remember talking to my mom. She's like, well, I promised Sam he doesn't have to go. And I go, yeah, Mom, if I don't have to tell you, like, A, that's not Sam anymore. That's somebody that looks like Sam, but has none of the same brain functions as Sam. And we've heard every horror story of horrible things happening because they ignored the signs. So I don't have to tell you, like, if you get stabbed or Sam hurts somebody or he hurts himself because you made some ridiculous promise that you weren't going to have him go to the hospital, that's insane. But I mean, I think what sucks is my parents had to, you know, not only was he picked up by the police, but my parents, sometimes he was so erratic and crazy, they would have to call the police on him. And nobody, especially in this environment, nobody trusts the police to actually handle mental health crises with grace and understanding, nor are they trained to. But we were very fortunate. And I will say the one thing about Sam is I remember one time they called the police on him, and it was like he was just like a defeated bear. So he opened up the door, he saw the police, and they're like, Sam, and this was like by the third time, he was like, all right. He just hunched over, and they were like, do you need to be cuffed? And he's like, no. And he would just walk and sit in the car, and then they take him. You know, it's like nobody wants that. Nobody, not only is it not handled well in our society or treated right, nobody wants to do that to their own kids. So it's just like, I think my parents were truly between a rock and a hard place of how do we handle this, where it's like we don't want to believe that this is the only option.
It almost feels like when that third time around that it happened, something like a small version of the real Sam was almost like yelling out for help, like just take me away from here because I need to be taken to somewhere where I can not hurt anybody. Do you think that might be something that was like, maybe he doesn't even know, but like a subconscious version of Sam going, like screaming for help was like, I got to get out of here?
What's wild is, you know, I've talked to Sam about this because I actually really wanted him to write this stuff down, even if he didn't do anything with it. But he remembers every crazy thing he said when he thought he was Jesus, when he thought he was Buddha. He kidnapped my mom and said they were going to, like, that they were going to drive to California to meet Jesus. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he did some crazy, wild shit. And I thought maybe when he got better, it was like this separate person, but he remembers all those thoughts. They are a part of him. So I just think that's such a wild, like, he's a really kind, silly man. Like, my brother is like, he's just a giant teddy bear. And I remember, this might have been like the second or third time, my mom called him a feral cat. He wouldn't come inside. They had like this kind of porch that had like, what do you call it? Like the mesh, like it didn't have windows, but it had like the mesh screened in
Like
porch.
the mosquito nets and stuff, right?
Yeah, so it was like this screened in porch, and there was a hammock on it, and he wouldn't come inside. It was clearly during the summer, and he would sleep on this hammock, and he would only come inside to pee. And he would only eat Quick Check sandwiches. So my mom would buy him a Quick Check sandwich 3 times a day and leave it on the porch like a feral cat. And my brother wouldn't look at him. He would chain smoke cigarettes. And she would buy him cigarettes. So he was chain smoking cigarettes, eating sandwiches, and drinking soda. And just my mom, and I remember my mom snapped at him. She's like, you can't just be a feral cat on my porch. And he laughed. And it was like a little bit of a spooky laugh, but it was the first time he got a joke in weeks. And my mom was like, I saw him, but at the same time, nothing changed. And it was like, it's still, I mean, we still joke about it because my mom was like, you know, I never want my kids to smoke, and here I'm buying 2 packs a day for this kid that won't talk to me. You know what I mean? Like truly like a little homeless person on her shelf, on her porch. But like, I mean, we can all laugh about it, and and I have jokes about it, and it, you know, but it was a very difficult thing to get through as a family, especially because, like I said, you're looking at somebody that is a shell of the person you knew. And it got really, really, the last time I remember me and my mom talked about it, we didn't think he was going to come back. Like, it was just, he was such a different version of himself. And it was for so long that you get to a point where you think, like, how do you even mentally reverse this?
Thankfully, we've kind of come to a point in medicine, and not just medicine, but actually understanding that even men are emotional beings, just like women, and things torment us. Just we probably don't talk about it as much until it may manifest into a psychotic break or something so serious.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And if you think about going back again, parents' generation, a generation before that, there was no such thing as mental illness for men or women. You're either crazy or tough it up.
Yeah.
There was no kind of like, let's
100%.
diagnose and try to help people. So I'm so happy we're in a place where you can make jokes about what your brother and your family went through, because you're on the other side of it, in a good place.
Absolutely. And I remember even after it happened the first time, I remember my brother feeling bad about himself. Like, I'm broken, something's wrong with me, I'm never going to fit in. And I was like, I went through my phone. I was like, she's bipolar 1. She's bipolar 2. She's been in and out of hospitals. She is doing this. This guy suffered from depression, tried to kill himself. Now he owns a business. Literally, I was like going through my contact list of every person I knew that had a difficult life or had their own mental struggles or whatever. This girl was a meth addict. This girl, you know what I mean? I was like, they're all fine. Do they, are they in therapy? Sure. Do they have bad days? Absolutely. Have they gone through breakups? Yeah. But like, they are functioning, happy, thoughtful people with friends and family, and they've moved on. You aren't your disease. You aren't your diagnosis. You aren't your past, as long as you work through it and build up and take care of yourself, which is he's done incredible at.
Yeah, I mean, it's like unfortunate that we don't look at a mental disease. Or at least, I mean, the shift has happened, but we don't look at like somebody with diabetes. Like, it should be the same thing. You have
Yeah.
something that's a lifelong problem that you're going to have to deal with. There's ways to deal with it, but it shouldn't be kind of like ostracized or made to feel less of a person because you had no control over any of that.
Yeah.
Especially in your brother's side, like it seems like it's genetic. It came from way before he even had an idea that he was going to be a person.
100%.
And so some of that has translated into your stand-up comedy work. And was it really, did you have to get permission before you did any of that stuff the first time? Or did you do it on stage and you're like, maybe I should talk to them about putting their lives out?
I start to write it and start to format it. I don't, if it's not going to end up being anything, I don't feel like I need to ask permission. But once it starts to be something, so also because I want it to be funny before I go, hey, I had this idea, and they're like, this sucks. So I start to kind of cultivate it and shape it, and then when I feels like it's going to be something, I'll go and be like, hey, is it okay to talk about this? Like, like I had a joke about both my grandmothers committing suicide, and my mom's super supportive, and it was the only time that my mom was like, I really miss my mom, and that joke makes me sad. And I was like, okay. And I just cut it out, because it's not my story. I understand that making a joke about something could be seen as dismissive, which my mom doesn't. I make tons of jokes about my mom and my mom being abusive, and I've always asked her permission. She goes, yeah, I'll just pretend it's somebody else. And I was like, yeah, Mom, we have the same face. Like, I only have one mom. Like, but my mom is very accepting and open, and I don't think takes it personally. Same with my brother. My brother's rule is always like, if it's funny, you can say whatever you want. So I still ask. I mean, even when I date somebody, I do a lot of jokes about people I've dated or friends, and I'll make sure that I'm not hurting their feelings. So like I had this joke about going to my friend's bachelorette party. It was like a 5-minute joke about ghosts because we went on a ghost tour. But I start out with the fact that she had 16 people at her bachelorette party. And I was like, that's too many people. Like, you're only allowed 11 men on a football field. Why do you need more support than the Giants, Amanda? Like, just basically being like, this is insane. And I was like, hey, I just want to make sure you're okay with this. And she's like, oh my God, my sister's going to love this. Like, she was like, everybody was like, this is too many people. So like, yes, I'm making fun of it, but it's from a place of love. And I just have to make sure most of my friends have great senses of humor and they get it. But, some stuff can touch a nerve and it's not worth hurting anybody.
Right. I guess you as a comedian know that fine line that you walk between I know this will hurt the person I'm speaking about versus he or she will get a really big chuckle out of it and find the humor. I mean, 16 people at a bachelorette party probably isn't going to hurt anybody's feelings that bad, but I can see how you could take that into a really dark place. But to that effect, that's kind of why I like your humor is it's I guess some of the issues that I find with comedians is like they always go for low hanging fruit, and they
Yeah.
completely lose me. Be it guys or girls. Girls, it's almost or women, it's almost always periods, vagina, that kind of stuff. Guys, it's always like dick and fart jokes. Within that, there's a small percentage of people that can do something very intelligent and funny with it. And then there are those that are just like, I don't need this at all. I can make funny, like the bachelorette party. It's a really funny bit. You also had one, and I'm not going to ruin it anyway, but with seeing your therapist and figuring out that I'm kind of cute and this kind of stuff. That's a bit you did. It's really funny and refreshing. That's kind of why I really wanted to talk to you was I haven't found too many female comedians that are um, very successful and genuinely funny. And you kind of fall into that small category of people for me. And I
Well, I
was
think,
curious.
yeah.
My curiosity was, how does I'm sorry for the ramble, but
No.
it was to lead up to how does inspiration and the process of coming up with jokes work for you?
So I'll answer that, but I'll go on my own little tangent, which is, if you don't allow women to be unique creatures and they're not um, given the space or being rewarded for it, you have less successful people. Because I've been relentless, I've carved my own space. But there are tons of brilliant female comedians that aren't given that space that might just not have the same business sense as me, so they're overlooked. So Adrienne Appalucci is probably one of the best writers, male
She's
or female,
hilarious.
right now. She's brilliant, and she's, her name's getting out there, or what have you, but she should be as successful, if not more successful than me. And I tell her that every day. She's one of my favorite people. Carmen Lynch can do jokes both in Spanish and English. She's brilliant in both. She's very silly. She's very weird. She doesn't, half the things she's talking about is what nobody else is talking about. But again, while she's had some outward success being on Conan and Letterman and the Tonight Show and stuff, her fan base she's having a difficult time, probably because she's building on both sides of it. She's building her Spanish while building her English fan base. But like, I can name Maria Shahada, Gina Brion, Rachel Feinstein. I mean, I could go on and on. Yamanika Sanders. Like, there's so many brilliant writers and voices out there. The problem is we aren't rewarded when we are different. So think of it even just from a Pandora playlist. If you put in Mike Birbiglia in Pandora, they'll give you suggestions of other comics like Mike Birbiglia. What is Mike Birbiglia? He's a storyteller. He's whimsical, but he's also a storyteller. He does more long form jokes and he's more thoughtful in his jokes. So you might get a Bill Burr because Bill Burr can go on stories and stuff like that, but you're probably going to get
Ron White, maybe.
maybe a Ron White, maybe a Kathleen Madigan, just somebody that tells like stories. Most female comics, when you put them into Pandora, who are their suggestions? Just other female comics. Why the
Right.
fuck am I on the same roster as a Eliza Schlesinger who's telling, A to B jokes, as opposed to I should be getting recommended Mike Birbiglia. I'm a fucking storyteller. So we are just seen as women and other women get suggested and like there's hip hop, there's country, there's rock and roll, there's acoustic, and you would not put in Led Zeppelin and get fucking Tracy Chapman. They're too different. But why is it that Mike Birbiglia gets to be a storyteller and I am just a woman with a vagina? So statistically, I'm not seen as having any depth, even when I have depth. And that's where the garbage is. You're not finding any thoughtful female comics because we're not allowed to be. We're not rewarded, and the industry doesn't care. And it's less about us being out there. And like, so even when somebody is thoughtful, they have to make a decision. Do I want to be successful? Because most of us can't be successful at that level. So the most successful female comics, are just talking about sexual things because that's what's rewarded algorithmically and industry wise.
So you mentioned one of my favorite female comedians, Eliza. Um, I've always been a fan of her work. And I know I can see how the difference between your type of comedy and her type of comedy. And for me, as a person that just appreciates the art, it sucks that these algorithms or whatever the gatekeepers are don't allow someone like me who just loves the art of comedy. I don't care who's on the stage, color, religion, gender, whatever. If you're gonna make me laugh, just make me laugh. Is all I care about. And that's why I wanted to ask you about that. Is like, how much of your success has been impeded because you are a female?
I mean, some of it's changing. It was a lot. I think it was 10 times harder when I started, and there's definitely more opportunities in the last 5 to 10 years than there ever have been. There's also a time and a place. People like shiny and new. Nobody goes, "Oh, you've been a female the whole time. Let's let's relook at you." You really get this little window of being new and different, and if you're not made at that point, you're overlooked. So you get about, like I said, this moment in time, and eventually you have to kind of crawl your way up. And so I think, some of it, I was young. I was both comedically and emotionally immature, and it is what it is. But I think being a young female comic, just being a young female in society, you're overlooked and not seen as having value. And this whole business is about opinions and how you see the world. And why would anybody think a 19-year-old has a interesting, different perspective? But then as I've gotten older, people decide who you are from what you look like, and you get a moment. So you can play with that. Like I tell comics all the time, it doesn't matter if you're, a big fat guy or you're a tiny whiskey woman or, you're ethnically ambiguous, whatever it is, you can play with knowing how people perceive you and use that to your advantage and doing jokes and what have you. That being said, there are some people that disregard you without you saying a word. There's some people that you have to fight for their attention. There's some people that will never value you no matter what. And I think as you get older in general, but definitely the further you go in this business, you stop fighting for those people because it's a waste of time. The same way that, why am I going to chase a man that doesn't really want to be with me and try to prove my value when there's so many people that are open to seeing my value without fighting? But we're taught that everybody should like you. Everybody should think you have value. And the truth is, it isn't true. I am being 100% myself and allowing and doing my best to make sure the people that would like me are able to see what I do. So because being a female comic is not rewarded, and especially being a thoughtful or different female comic isn't being rewarded, I have to go to different lengths and find different avenues for people to come see me. And I'm very fortunate because of the internet, because of YouTube and Instagram, and truly everything about the internet is the reason I have a career, because I was never really a TV comic. I did a little bit of TV, but even to this day, I'm 21 years in and I have truly a fourth of the TV credits that most of my friends do.
And was that something that was, anyway, I want to come back to the question of how your writing process and inspiration works, but on a side note, was that something that was kind of like the 16-year-old version of you when you got up on the stage and the back of your head was TV and film, the natural progression you're trying to reach at some point? Or, because this is like late 90s, so everybody's still fighting to get a sitcom if they're lucky or get on a late night show. These were like the gatekeepers, really. The internet and what you talk about now with podcasting and Instagram didn't exist in 99. So,
yeah. There was one traditional path, and I think when I started to realize that this is what I wanted to do, I definitely wanted that traditional path. And I had a couple of things, but there was a lot of stuff, and to this day, still a lot of stuff that I've never been able to attain traditionally. I've never done Just for Laughs. I've never been on late night. I've never been on a panel show. There's so many uh, like traditional things that you're supposed to do that would define a successful comic that I've never done. Yet I'm considered probably at my level one of the more successful people. And that is 100% because I decided I'm not going to let this business tell me I'm not, that I don't have value and that I can't do this. And I just charted to find any way that I could do this on my own. And I'm still doing that. Like, I now have an agent and a manager, and while they are extremely helpful and believe in me and have gotten me a lot of work, they're not getting me the amount of work that I want and that I think I deserve. And I'm very fortunate that they let me do whatever I want. So a good example is they booked me for Austin. Great. I had 4 shows in 2 days in Austin, but they couldn't get me Dallas and they couldn't get me Houston. But I've done Houston on my own for years before I even met them. So I booked Houston on my own. And then I talked to a kid that opened for me when I was in Fort Worth years ago, asked him if he could help me get a venue for Dallas, got Dallas. I made more money and had more people come out to my Dallas show and my Houston show. And even though I sold out 4 shows in Austin, the deal wasn't great because the deal was done through almost we're doing you a favor, as opposed to I fought and negotiated the door deal for Houston and Dallas. And that's what I'm teaching all my friends, is not only figuring out how to build a fan base, but also making sure that you get the money and respect for the amount of people that you're bringing in. And that could be, you can make a living out of having 60 people come out to a show. Yes, we all want hundreds and thousands. We all want to fucking do Madison Square Garden, but you can make a living and live a great life and a financially stable life if you have 60 people in each city.
So the young person that helped you out, I'm guess is it the same young person that put me onto you? Was it Cheyenne?
Yeah.
So
He's the
Cheyenne
best.
was my first guest on the
He's the
podcast,
best.
and yeah, he doesn't know this, but man, if he had said no to me, this would have never come about.
Oh my God. We got to let him know he has so much power.
Yeah, so like, and Ari Shafir has no clue about this, but if Ari Shafir wasn't in Dallas and I didn't get to see him and see Cheyenne, I just probably would have never done it. I wanted to
Yeah.
do it. I bought all the equipment, but like there was this fear of failure that was like, "But nobody's gonna say yes to you." You know what I mean? But he
Yeah.
said yes, and it kind of like a snowball effect has happened after that, and I love it.
Yeah.
And he's the one that put me on to you. He's like, "Hey, she's amazing. She's gonna be in town." And then I got to
Yeah.
check out your work, and I was like, I have to try to have her on the podcast.
Yeah. He's the best. He's such a wonderful person. But I guess back to what you were saying before, like I would say my writing process, I actually, so I did a 4-part mini doc about my last tour in Europe, and the 4th episode that's coming out next Tuesday, actually, like I did Natalie Como's podcast. She asked a similar question, and I used clips from that and I showed it through building up this episode 2 of my doc. We get a ticket that we shouldn't have gotten for, just like the stupid ticket in Paris. And my friend taped me yelling at this guy. And then every country I went to, I talked about this injustice. This is bullshit. Paris is bullshit. I'm going to tell you why Paris is bullshit. And I built every city. I told that joke. And now it's one of my favorite jokes. I like open with it. But my process is usually something bad happens. I'm angry about it. I tell all my friends. They all have to know I'm angry about it. And through just being my crazy, ridiculous self, I start to hear where my friends laugh, or where I can start to hear the nuggets of a perspective. And then I start to write it down, and then I start to perform it, and then I start to tweak it based on how it's working. And it's just a process of constant editing and figuring out where I'm getting the acceptance and the attention and the laughs that I feel work. And sometimes I'm not getting it, and it's not that I went down the wrong path. It's just that I'm not expressing it the right way. And I am very long-winded. I'm the type of person that will tell a story and there'll be no laughs. It'll just be all anger. And then I have to go back and be like, give them something here. You know what I mean? And you start to be able to hear the lulls, or hear the impatience and I'm pretty good at like 100% being myself and being like, they don't need to know that. And you're just being a bitch here. And you know what I mean? And like maybe say something whimsical here or give them if you're going to say this detail, make it silly. You know what I mean? And I'm always kind of being like, what's a unique way of saying this? What's a unique way of saying this? So the first version of saying it, maybe some uniqueness is out there because that's who I am. So like, I haven't done a joke about it yet, but like I was telling my sister, this is like too graphic, but it doesn't matter. But I was telling my sister, like I was going on a bunch of dates with this guy and she was like, are you going to have sex with him? And I was like, I don't know. It's been a while. I was like, if he's even remotely nice to me, like it's dusty and I'm just looking for a dick broom. Like, I do not know. And she just laughed so hard. And it was like,
that is
you
the
know what I
best
mean?
thing I've ever heard.
Exactly. Because it was just, that's how I talked to my sister. I was like, dude, it's dusty down there and I'm just looking for a dick broom. Like he doesn't need to be special. I just need to feel safe. And because I said it that way, and even my sister's very silly, that's the way I talk naturally. But sometimes I'm so angry, I forget to talk that way. And it's how do I insert this Liz silliness into it? So I have this joke in my act where, I go, this guy came over. I was talking about how I had a crush on this guy. And I go, this guy comes over. We're making small talk. And I just have this thought. I go, I want this man in my apartment again. He matches my wallpaper. So I develop a little crush. And it's just this silly line where it's like, I looked at him and I was like, he just fits in with my apartment. And I was just like, I want him around. And it's like, I just took that thought and I took it a little further. He matches my wallpaper. What a dumb thing to say. What does that even mean? You know what I mean? And it lets people kind of be in their own place, but it also lets people know how silly this crush is. This crush is basically, he seemed like he belonged here. You know what I mean? And that's the little details that I'm putting in. And while the dick broom isn't the punchline, the dick broom, if I do this joke, is setting up where I am sexually in my mind, which is he's an object, which nobody likes to be talked about that way, but that is how I saw this guy.
Yeah, but like, see, that's what I was saying about the intelligence of doing not a dick joke or a sex joke, but dick broom is the intelligence there, where nobody
Yeah.
kind of would have thought about it, and you'd put it there.
Yeah.
I'm not laughing because it's a sexual joke or a dick joke. I'm laughing because it's dick broom. That's like the most hilarious way of someone explaining a lull in their kind of like sexual timeline. It's
Yeah.
hilarious. So I love that. I can see why your sister probably was cracking up laughing when you said it.
Yeah. And also, I don't know if I really was thinking it was a laugh line. That's how my mind works, is like I make these similes and these images, and sometimes I need my sister's laughter, or I have friends that'll be like, stop, write that down. Sometimes it's not even a funny line. It's just, I created a simile and I created a picture. Like, I don't know if I'll turn a joke into it, but the same guy, we were on a couple of dates and he said that we were, handicap parking spots because we're both in our late 30s and we're single. And I was like, speak for yourself. He goes, you're handicapped. I was like, no, I used to be a handicap. And he meant it like, we're the only spaces that are available and nobody knows what to do with us. And it's like, I absolutely was. I was a fucking mess in my 20s. And I absolutely was like, just not accessible. But now I've done all this therapy. I know my value. I'm not a handicap parking spot. I am the best parking spot on the block. And you're scared of it because you don't know why it's available. You're looking at the signs. You're waiting for somebody to pop out and fucking puncture your tires. Why, and this is very boastful, why am I 37 and single when I'm so awesome? I can tell you is because I was a mess when I was in my 20s. But when you see the parking spot, you don't know that a car was parked there for 2 years and finally left and nobody knows it's available. You just go, hey, this is too good to be true. Why is this available? And that was like just something I was telling my friend because I was just like, fuck you, I'm not a handicap parking spot. And so is it funny yet? No. But do I like the imagery and I want to see where I go with it? Absolutely. So it's those little moments where my friend will be like, hey, just write that down. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but write it down.
That's really cool. So you get something that isn't necessarily the joke yet, but you put down the word or the inspiration for it, and then kind of like revisit it and work it out in your own head until it becomes something that is either going to be on stage or not.
Yeah, because by writing it down, you've told your brain that it's important. and now your brain, without consciously doing anything, is thinking about it. So the fact that I said the Dick Brim thing to my sister, and now I've said it to you, and I wrote it down, I'm still cultivating what is the structure of this joke? Where am I going with it? What am I actually trying to say? I don't know yet. It's just a line right now. It's just a feeling. It's just a place I am in my life. What do I want to say with it? I don't know the rest of that story yet. So sometimes I sit down and I flesh it out because I just need to actually think about it. Or I just kind of go through my life. Like that scenario with that guy, I'm not seeing him anymore. We mutually were like, hey, I don't think I'm interested. So what is the next step? Is it going on more dates? Am I frustrated that we didn't sleep together a little bit? You know what I mean? Like, so there's this kind of moment where I'm dealing with my life as it happens, but also I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to tell people and what little sliver of my life am I trying to show. And I don't know it yet. And sometimes that stays in my phone or in my notebook for years. And sometimes within a week, something happens or I have an idea, but just because I don't know where it's going to end doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And I just have to dump it and either let my brain do stuff, my life just fall out in front of me and give me ideas, or something might happen. Like I had this story. It was like almost like an anecdote I told people, which is that I had to go to the DMV and I had to get a New York license, New York plates, and register like my car. But it was a gift. I had borrowed my dad's car for 8 years, and I was going to have him help me buy a car. And he surprised me and he gifted me that car. It was one of the nicest things he ever did. Truly.
It's kind of yours already for 8 years.
I know. I borrowed it every weekend. It was super inconvenient.
That's awesome.
And so I literally saved up $4,000 and I was going to ask my dad to help me buy a used car and like go with me. And he ended up giving it to me and being like, hey, this thing's going to fall apart. Use that $4,000 to pay for how this thing is going to fall apart. But he gifted me this car and I had to now go to the DMV. And I was so stressed about it because I didn't know if he had to come with me. I didn't know anything about it, that I did all this research. I filled out all this paper. I did everything. So that when I went to the DMV, I was the first person in line. And I told the woman what I had to do. And she's like, okay, you need to do this and go into this line. And I was like, I did it. She's like, you need to go in this and fill out this paperwork. And I was like, I did it. She's like, you need to go do this and you got to fill out this. I was like, I did it. And it's a gift. So I filled this out. And I don't know what this is, but I filled it out too. And the woman was like, all right. And she gives me this like half smile. I was like, best day of my life. I made a woman at the Brooklyn DMV smile. Do you understand? My organizational skills made the woman like... And that whole story, it didn't stand on its own. I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't do anything with it. It was just a thing that like I told friends at this point, because anytime I tried it on stage, there was nowhere for it to go. And then I got turned away in England trying to go to Finland because my passport, it can't expire 3 months. It was 2 days shy of 3 months of expiring. And a lot of Scandinavian countries, it can't be less than 3 months before it expires. Makes no fucking sense. And I was 3 days shy. And I was going for a weekend for a festival. I was like, I don't want to live here. I don't like it here. But it became this whole debacle. And now it could have been an airport joke, but it wasn't an airport joke. It was an organizational joke about how this shit doesn't happen to me. And this is like, this level of unpreparedness has never happened. And let me show why. So now this DMV story is in the middle of another story about how I had to not only book a second flight and go to the US Embassy in the UK and almost missed the second flight. So it's a 7-minute bit that story is tucked into to exemplify why this stuff doesn't happen to me, because I am on top of my shit.
That is so cool. So like that really kind of ties it all together. It's like you had an idea, tried it on stage, couldn't find the funny in it, and then something almost actually unrelated happens. And I guess in the back of your mind, it's like, oh, I have OCD. I can probably tie all this together, because if my OCD was in check, my passport would have never been expiring anyways.
But really, it's not even that. It's to say that they're wrong. Like, if this is happening to me, your rules are wrong. It doesn't make sense. They never told me if it's that important, why wouldn't that be on every piece of paperwork? Why am I even here if this is an issue? So I'm telling you, this stuff doesn't happen to me because I'm on top of it more than anybody else. So if it's happening to me, you're doing something wrong. That's pretty much the whole point of this 7-minute story. But then also what it looked like. Like I have a line in there going like, I'm now running through the airport. He's like, just keep in mind, I've never run through an airport. I've always judged the airport runner. Just wake up early, get your life together. But now as I'm running through an airport, I think, well, maybe the Finnish are ruining everybody's life. Who am I to judge? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like the way I kind of put it all, it could have easily been like the airport sucks or whatever. And it's called Fuck Finland, a story about organization. But like, it could have easily been like airports suck, which we all have jokes about. But instead, it was about how this stuff doesn't happen to me because I'm on top of my shit.
Yeah, I think that's the important part is a great comedian will show us a lot of the bullshit in our own lives and make us laugh at it. We can connect with you on your story. It doesn't have to be exactly the same for us, but all of us have had like just go back to, not having a boyfriend or a girlfriend for a while. We've all had that, right? We've all had like
Yeah.
lulls in our lives. And the way you did it with the Dick Broom thing is like all of us can find the funny in our own situation, kind of like tying it with yours. So it's cool to see that the audience can actually have a, an impact on how a joke goes versus on how you thought it was supposed to go.
So I think in a lot of ways between every country really taking in a lot of American television and knowing the American sensibility, especially the New York and aggressive sensibility, on top of the fact that what I'm talking about is quite universal, I haven't had too many issues. Am I, like my documentary says, I am mildly successful around the world, but some people don't have anybody in Toronto or the UK or Australia. And I have enough that I can fill a small 100-seater. So I mean, I have defined my own level of success and I'm proud of myself and I make a living, but I can see how some people are like, is it really all that universal if only 100 people come?
Huh. I never thought about it that way. But I mean, take a club like Hyenas in Dallas, 100 people, that's a pretty packed house. A
True.
lot of people don't get that.
For absolutely. And like I said, financially, I'm doing great. You get 100 people in every city and you make a good living. And I think some people mathematically don't really understand that. And that's something I figured out on my own. And there are people exclusively coming to see me and not just comedy in general. So I'm doing great. I'm not complaining about my career. I like my career. But in the scheme of things, like you said, Eliza Schlesinger is doing stadiums and I'm doing
Netflix
tiny
specials, yeah.
theaters. Is my perspective really universal? That's
Got
the
it.
question. We don't know. We don't know if it's just people haven't seen me or I haven't had the industry success that Eliza has had, or that my perspective just isn't for as many people as Eliza. I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you there are people that look at my career and go, it's there for a reason. It's only time will tell.
So I think I completely agree with what you just said. As far as like, I don't want to ever compare a comedian with another comedian, so I wouldn't compare you to Eliza or Eddie Murphy or anybody else. Doesn't matter who that name is. What I think I would say is that your level of talent is on par with some of the greats, even though you may not be there yet. I feel like you will be at some point. There will be a Liz version of you 20 years from now going like, but I'm not Liz, I'm Janice or I'm Amanda, comparing you to what Eliza is now. I don't see a reason why you wouldn't reach that height. So I want to put like a pin on this question of the, is it universal for you? When we get to sit down again in the future and you've actually sold out arenas and we can talk about that because it's bound to happen. I know, like, even me, I'm not a comedian at all, but in my own personal life, I know I've looked at other people and I'm like, how come that person's there and I'm not? And then I realized at one point, it was like, I'm just not on that timeline. I have a different timeline and mine will come.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
it's very
really,
sweet. And
I
I'll
really,
take you up on
yeah, no,
that.
I really think you've got the talent that's going to take to, take you all the way to the top because you said it yourself. Female comedians don't really get the same opportunities that they should. And you guys are in such a smaller kind of like pool of people that exist, female comedians. So give it the time it needs. I promise you will be talking, hopefully with me one day, about the arena you sold out.
I love it. I appreciate it.
So, Liz, thank you again for taking the time to speak to me today. I really appreciate it. And tell people where they can find you on IG and your other social medias.
Yeah, everything is at Liz Miele, so Miele. And then, I put out clips on Instagram, but I have this 4-part mini doc called Jet Lag that's on YouTube. I have 3 full specials on YouTube. And I have a book called Why Cats Are Assholes that you can buy pretty much anywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, what have you.
And she's being modest here. She's got millions of views on her specials, and I'm sure the documentary's doing fine, and you kill it anywhere you go. You know you're killing it anywhere you go because people contacted me saying you're going to be in Dallas and I should check you out.
That's nice.
Other comedians spoke so highly of you that don't ever for a second doubt, how good of a stand-up you are.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having
Liz,
me, Tom.
thanks again. Have a great weekend. I appreciate it, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.